I stared at the DNA results, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the paper. The words blurred through my tears. Close family match detected, but that was impossible. I was an only child. I had always been an only child. Or so I thought, until science proved that everything I believed about my life was a lie. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, I lived what I thought was a perfectly ordinary life. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, with my parents, Margaret and David Chen. They were older when they had me. Mom was 39, Dad was 42, and they always told me I was their miracle baby. We tried for so long, Mom would say, stroking my hair, and then you came to us, perfect and precious. Sure, I looked a little different. My eyes were rounder than theirs. My nose had a different shape. But genetics can be funny that way, right? Plus, I was adopted from China when I was 6 months old. My parents were completely transparent about that. They showed me photos of the orphanage, told me stories about their trip to Guangzhou to bring me home, and always made me feel chosen, not abandoned. Growing up, I was obsessed with dance. Ballet, specifically. Started when I was 4, and by the time I was in high school, I was spending 6 hours a day at the studio. My parents drove me to competitions all over the West Coast, spent thousands on lessons and costumes, and never once complained. They were my biggest cheerleaders, sitting in auditorium seats with bouquets of flowers, filming every performance on their old camcorder. College took me to UCLA for their dance program, and that's where I met Jake. He was a film student, tall and lanky with messy brown hair and the most genuine smile I'd ever seen. Our first conversation happened in the campus coffee shop. I was stretched out on the floor doing splits while studying for my anatomy exam. And he just walked over and said, "That looks incredibly painful, but also incredibly impressive." We were inseparable from that moment. Jake understood my passion for dance the way my parents did. But with the added excitement of someone discovering it for the first time, he'd film my rehearsals for his projects, and I'd be his subject for lighting experiments. We complemented each other perfectly. Where I was disciplined and structured, he was creative and spontaneous. After graduation, we moved in together in a tiny apartment in Silver Lake. I got into a contemporary dance company, and Jake started working as a production assistant on indie films. The money was tight, but we were happy. Really, genuinely happy. We'd cook dinner together every night, sharing stories about our days, planning our future. Marriage felt inevitable, but we weren't in any rush. We had time. It was during this period that I started getting more curious about my background. Not in a way that suggested I was unhappy. I loved my parents, and I knew they loved me. But I found myself wondering about small things. Why did I have such flexible joints when neither of my parents did? Why was I naturally drawn to spicy food when they couldn't handle anything stronger than black pepper? Why did I have this weird habit of humming while I concentrated, a quirk that neither Mom nor Dad shared? Jake encouraged my curiosity. "You should do one of those DNA tests," he said one evening, as we watched a commercial for 23andMe. "Not because there's anything wrong with your family, but because knowledge is power, you know? Maybe you'll discover you're part Viking or something." I laughed at the time, but the seed was planted. Started researching genealogy websites, reading forums where adoptees shared their experiences. Some stories were heartbreaking. People discovering difficult truths about their birth parents. Uncovering family secrets that shattered their understanding of themselves. But others were beautiful. Siblings finding each other across continents. Birth parents and children reuniting after decades apart. The more I read, the more I realized I wasn't looking for my birth parents necessarily. I was looking for myself, for the missing pieces that might explain why I felt most at home when I was moving. Why I could pick up choreography faster than anyone in my classes. Why it always felt like I was searching for something I couldn't name. My parents were supportive when I finally told them about my interest in genetic testing. "Whatever you discover, sweetheart, it doesn't change how much we love you," Dad said, pulling me into one of his bear hugs. "You're our daughter no matter what some test says." Mom was a little more nervous. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said. "Sometimes people go looking for answers and find questions they wish they'd never asked." I promised I'd be careful, but deep down, I felt ready for whatever I might discover. I had a stable, loving foundation. I had Jake. I had my career. I had parents who adored me, How complicated could it really be? On my 28th birthday, Jake surprised me with a 23andMe kit wrapped in silver paper with a note that read, "For all the answers you re-looking for, and all the surprises you're not expecting. Happy birthday, my love." I kissed him and held the box in my hands, feeling the weight of possibility. I had no idea that inside this small package was the key to discovering that my entire understanding of my identity was about to be turned upside down. The DNA test itself was anticlimactic. I spit in a tube, sealed it up, and mailed it off on a Tuesday morning in March. The waiting period was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks, and honestly, I kind of forgot about it. Life got busy. Our dance company was preparing for our spring showcase. Jake was working on a short film that was consuming all his free time, and I was teaching beginner ballet classes at a local studio to help pay the bills. It was Jake who reminded me about the test results. "Hey, didn't you do that DNA thing like 2 months ago?" he asked one evening as we were making pasta. "You should check if your results are ready." I logged into the 23andMe website, expecting to see some basic ethnicity breakdowns. Maybe some interesting tidbits about being 2% Scandinavian or having a genetic predisposition to liking cilantro. What I saw instead made me freeze. The ethnicity results were there, sure enough. 94% East Asian, 6% various other regions. Nothing surprising about that. But it was the section labeled DNA relatives that caught my attention. Usually, these tests connect you with distant cousins, people who share great-great-grandparents you've never heard of. But at the top of my list was something I'd never seen before: close family match. The profile showed minimal information. Just a first name, Emma, and a location: Seattle, WA. But the genetic relationship was listed as half-sister or aunt, with a confidence level of 99.9%. The amount of shared DNA was substantial, 1,768 centimorgans, which meant absolutely nothing to me, but the website's interpretation was clear. This person was either my half-sister or my aunt. "Jake," I called, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "Can you come look at this?" He read over my shoulder, his hand resting on my back. "Okay, so you have a relative in Seattle. That's cool, right? Maybe your birth parents had other kids." But something felt off. I'd been adopted as a baby from China. If I had a half-sister, wouldn't she also be in China? Why would she be in Seattle? And why would she have taken a DNA test? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I decided to message her. The 23andMe platform allows you to contact your DNA matches, and I spent an hour crafting what I hoped was a casual, non-threatening message. "Hi, Emma. Got your information as a close family match on 23andMe. Was adopted from China when I was a baby, and I live in LA now. I'd love to know more about our connection, if you're open to sharing. Hope to hear from you. Sarah." I hit send before I could overthink it, then immediately regretted it. What if she didn't want contact? What if this opened up a complicated family situation she'd been trying to avoid? The response came faster than I expected. Within 2 hours, my phone buzzed with a notification. "Sarah, I can't believe this. Was also adopted from China as a baby, and I've been living in Seattle my whole life. I think we might be sisters. Can we talk on the phone? Emma sisters?" The word hit me like a physical blow. I sat down heavily on our couch, staring at the message. Jake was at work, so I was alone with this revelation that suddenly made my apartment feel too small and too quiet. I called my mom first. "Mom, I got my DNA results back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, how exciting. Did you discover you're secretly royalty?" She joked, but I could hear the underlying tension. She'd been nervous about this from the beginning. "Mom, it says I have a sister. A close family match in Seattle. She was also adopted from China." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Mom spoke, and her voice was different. Smaller, more careful. "Sarah, honey, that can't be right. The adoption agency told us you were surrendered alone. There was never any mention of siblings." But even as she said it, I could hear the uncertainty creeping in. "Could the agency have made a mistake?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. The paperwork from China wasn't always complete. Sometimes information was lost or misunderstood in translation. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma in Seattle, probably lying awake too, wondering the same things I was wondering. Did we look alike? Did we have the same laugh, the same quirks? Had we been separated as babies, adopted by different families, spent 28 years living parallel lives just a few hundred miles apart? When Jake came home from his shoot, he found me sitting on the floor surrounded by printed articles about Chinese adoption practices, international adoption laws, and stories of separated siblings finding each other through DNA testing. "This is really happening, isn't it?" he said, sitting down beside me. "I think so," I whispered. "Jake, what if I have a twin sister? What if we were supposed to grow up together and some paperwork error or administrative decision split us up? What if I've been missing half of myself my entire life and never even knew it?" He pulled me close, and I realized I was crying. Not sad tears exactly, but overwhelmed tears. The kind you cry when your whole world suddenly expands in a way you never expected. "Whatever this is," Jake said softly, "we'll figure it out together." Emma and I talked for 3 hours that first night. 3 hours that felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. Her voice was different from mine, a little deeper, a slight Pacific Northwest accent. But there were moments when she'd de-laugh or make a comment that felt like hearing an echo of my own thoughts. She told me about her life growing up in Seattle with her parents, Linda and Robert Kim, who had also adopted her from China when she was 6 months old. She described a childhood filled with piano lessons instead of dance, hiking trips instead of ballet competitions. But the same overwhelming love and support from parents who chose to bring her home. "The weird thing is," she said around midnight, "I've always felt like something was missing. It's not because my parents weren't enough. They were incredible. But like there was this empty space. I could unidentify. I knew exactly what she meant. It was the feeling I tried to describe too. Jake but could never quite articulate. Like being perpetually homesick for a place you've never been. "Do you think we're twins?" I asked finally, the question that had been burning in my mind all day. "I've been wondering the same thing," she admitted. "The timing makes sense. We're both 28, both adopted at 6 months from the same region in China. In this DNA match, it's showing us as close relatives, not distant cousins. We made a plan to exchange photos first, then arranged to meet in person. I spent the next morning selecting pictures, school photos, family snapshots, recent selfies, trying to choose images that would give her the clearest sense of what I looked like. When I opened the folder she sent me later that afternoon, I literally gasped. It wasn't that we looked identical. We didn't. But the similarities were undeniable. The shape of our eyes, the way our hair fell, even our expressions in candid shots. In one photo she was mid-laugh, and it could have been me. In another, she had this thoughtful, slightly serious expression that I recognized from every family portrait I'd ever taken. Jake came home to find me staring at my laptop screen, switching back and forth between Emma's photos and pictures of myself. "Oh my God," he said, looking over my shoulder. "Sarah, you guys look like sisters. You really do." But looking alike wasn't definitive proof. Plenty of people share similar features without being related. We needed more certainty, and that meant getting a proper DNA test, specifically designed to determine sibling relationships. "I want to be sure," I told Emma during our second phone call. "Before we meet, before we tell our parents everything, before we get emotionally invested in this possibility, I want to know for certain what our relationship is." She agreed immediately. "There are those specialized sibling DNA tests, right? More accurate than the general ancestry ones?" I'd already researched it. A full sibling DNA test could determine with over 99% accuracy whether two people shared both biological parents. It was more expensive than the 2,3-NDM test, and it required both of us to participate, but it would give us definitive answers. The decision to take that test felt monumental. It wasn't just about satisfying curiosity anymore. This was about potentially discovering that my entire understanding of my identity had been incomplete. If Emma was my twin, it meant we'd been separated as babies, raised in different cities by different families, and had missed out on 28 years of shared experiences. "What if we are twins?" I asked Jake that night. "What if we were meant to grow up together, and some decision made by people we've never met changed the entire course of both our lives?" "Then you'll have found something amazing," he said. "And you'll figure out how to move forward from here." But I was also terrified of the opposite outcome. What if we're not? What if this is just a coincidence, and I've gotten my hopes up for nothing? Jake took my hands and looked at me seriously. then you'll have met someone who shares your background and your story, and that's still pretty incredible. Emma and I ordered the sibling DNA test kit on the same day. The process was more involved than the simple ancestry test. We both had to provide cheek swabs, and the analysis would take 4 to 6 weeks. The waiting was going to be excruciating, but we both knew we needed that certainty before taking any next steps. While we waited for the test results, Emma and I talked almost every night. We compared childhood memories, shared stories about our adoptions, and discovered dozens of small similarities that felt too significant to be coincidental. We both bit our nails when we were nervous. We both had the same allergic reaction to certain laundry detergents. We both preferred our coffee black and our chocolate dark. It's like finding pieces of a puzzle I didn't know was incomplete, Emma told me during one of our late-night conversations. The hardest part was not telling our parents everything yet. ID shared the basic information, that ID found a potential relative through the DNA test, but I hadn't mentioned the possibility that Emma might be my twin. I wanted to wait until we had definitive answers before potentially turning everyone's world upside down. 3 weeks into the waiting period, Emma called me with news that made my heart race. "Sarah, I found our adoption paperwork," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. I was going through my parents' files, looking for anything that might give us more information about our background. And I found something. What is it? The adoption agency listed my Chinese name as Chen Meilin. What was yours? My breath caught. Chen Meiling. The similarity was too striking to ignore. Meilin and Meiling, names that were almost identical, differentiated by a single character. In Chinese culture, twins are often given names that mirror each other, small variations on the same theme. "Emma," I whispered, "I think we're about to get the confirmation we've been waiting for." The email arrived on a Thursday morning at 6:47 a.m. I know the exact time, because I'd been checking my phone obsessively for weeks, waking up at odd hours to refresh my inbox. The subject line was simple and sterile. "Your DNA test results are ready." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tap the link. Jake was still asleep beside me, and part of me wanted to wake him up, to have someone there with me when I opened what might be the most important piece of information I'd ever received. But another part of me needed to face this moment alone first, to have a few seconds to process whatever truth was waiting for me before sharing it with anyone else. I clicked the link and logged into the testing portal. The page loaded slowly, or maybe time just felt stretched thin, and then there it was. I displayed in bold letters across my screen. Full sibling relationship confirmed. Probability 99.97%. I stared at those words until they blurred through my tears. Full sibling. Not half-sister. Not cousin. Not some distant relative. Emma and I shared both biological parents. We're twins, separated at birth, and raised by different families. Living our entire lives just 350 miles apart without knowing the other existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Are you awake?" I got the results. I called her immediately, not trusting myself to type a coherent message. "Sarah," her voice was thick with tears. "We're twins," I whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that seeing it on the screen hadn't. We're actually twins. Both of us were crying now, these raw, overwhelming sobs that came from somewhere deep inside, from a place I didn't even know existed. It was grief and joy and relief and confusion all tangled together into something I'd never felt before. 28 years, Emma said through her tears. We've been living 28 years apart. I couldn't speak. I was thinking about every birthday I'd ever celebrated alone. Every Christmas morning when I'd wondered if there was someone else in the world who shared my DNA. Every moment of my childhood when I'd felt inexplicably lonely despite being surrounded by love. When Jake woke up an hour later, he found me sitting on our bathroom floor, still in my pajamas, still crying. Phone pressed to my ear as Emma and I tried to make sense of what this revelation meant for our lives. We're twins, I told him. And his face went through the same progression of emotions I'd experienced. Shock, wonder, joy, and then a kind of protective concern, as he realized the magnitude of what I was processing. Over the next few days, Emma and I tried to piece together what might have happened. We contacted the adoption agencies our parents had used, but the records from that time were incomplete. What we learned was that in the late 1990s, Chinese adoption practices were often overwhelmed. With hundreds of babies needing placement and limited resources for documentation, it wasn't unheard of for siblings to be separated, especially if they were sick, or if there were concerns about placing multiple children with the same family. The agency representative told my parents, "There was a notation in your file," Emma told me during one of our calls. "Something about a respiratory infection when you were first brought to the orphanage. They might have separated us to prevent me from catching whatever you had. So our separation might have been a medical precaution that became permanent when different families fell in love with each of us. We were both healthy babies who ended up with wonderful, loving parents, but we'd missed out on growing up together because of a decision made to protect us." The person I called next was my mom. I couldn't keep this information to myself any longer. She deserved to know that her family was about to expand in the most unexpected way. "Mom, I need to tell you something about the DNA results," I said when she answered. I could hear the immediate tension in her voice. "What is it, sweetheart?" "The person I matched with, Emma. She's not just a relative, she's my twin sister." The silence that followed felt endless. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your twin sister. We both have the same Chinese birth names. We were both adopted at 6 months from the same region, and the DNA test confirms we're full siblings. Mom, I have a twin sister I never knew existed." I heard her tell Dad what I'd just shared, heard his sharp intake of breath in the background. "Oh, Sarah," Mom said, and she was crying now too. "Oh, my baby girl. All these years you had a sister out there. You okay with this?" I asked, suddenly worried that this news might make my parents feel inadequate somehow, like they hadn't been enough for me. "Okay with it." Mom's voice was stronger now. "Sweetheart, this is wonderful. You found a piece of yourself we never even knew was missing. When do we get to meet her?" That question stopped me short. In all the emotional processing, I hadn't thought about the practical next steps. Emma and I had been so focused on confirming our relationship that we hadn't talked about what came after confirmation. "I don't know," I admitted. "We've been talking on the phone for weeks, but we haven't actually met in person yet." "Well, that needs to change," Mom said firmly. "This has gone on long enough. 28 years is 28 years too many." When I hung up the phone, I realized she was right. All the DNA tests in the world couldn't replace actually being in the same room as my twin sister. Looking into her eyes, maybe finally understanding why I'd always felt like something was missing. I texted Emma, "Are you ready to meet your twin sister?" Her response came back immediately. "I've been ready my whole life." We decided to meet halfway between Seattle and Los Angeles, in San Francisco. It seemed appropriate somehow. Neutral territory where neither of us had any history. A place where we could focus entirely on each other without distractions from our separate lives. The plan was simple. We'd both fly in on Saturday morning and meet at Union Square at noon. I'd wear a red jacket, she'd carry a yellow bag, and we'd find each other in the crowd of tourists and shoppers. It sounded easy enough, but as my flight descended into SFO, I realized I was more nervous than I'd ever been in my life. This wasn't just meeting a long-lost relative. This was meeting the person who shared my DNA more completely than anyone else on Earth. The person who might have been my best friend, was my closest confidant, my other half if circumstances had been different. The person whose absence had left a hole in my life I'd never been able to identify. Jake came with me for moral support, and Emma brought her boyfriend, Marcus, for the same reason. We figured having our partners there might help ground us if the emotions became too overwhelming. I saw her before she saw me. I was standing near the entrance to Macy's, scanning the crowd, when my eyes landed on a woman with a yellow bag slung over her shoulder, looking around with the same slightly anxious expression I was probably wearing. Even from 50 feet away, even knowing what to expect, the resemblance was startling. "That's her," I told Jake, pointing across the square. When Emma spotted me, we both just stopped and stared for a moment. All those weeks of phone calls and photo exchanges hadn't fully prepared me for seeing my own features reflected in another person's face. We had the same walk, the same way of holding our shoulders. Even the same nervous habit of tucking our hair behind our ears when we were uncertain. The moment we reached each other, something clicked into place. It wasn't dramatic or movie-like. We didn't run toward each other in slow motion or collapse into tears. Instead, we just looked at each other for a few seconds, taking in all the similarities and differences. And then Emma smiled and said, "Well, this is weird." I burst out laughing, and that broke whatever tension we'd both been carrying. We hugged, and it felt natural in a way that surprised me. Like muscle memory from before we could form conscious memories. "You're taller than I expected," she said. "You have different hair than in your photos," I replied. And then we just started talking, not about the heavy stuff at first, just normal, everyday conversation. She asked about my flight. I commented on her jacket. We compared notes about San Francisco and whether either of us had been there before. Our boyfriends hung back, giving us space but staying close enough to intervene if we needed them. It was during lunch at a little cafe near the waterfront that the reality of our situation really hit home. We were sharing stories about our adoptions, comparing the details our parents had told us, when Emma mentioned something that stopped me cold. "My parents always said the adoption agency told them I was an only child," she said. "They specifically asked about siblings because they'd hoped to adopt 2 children, but they were told I'd been surrendered alone." I felt my stomach drop. "Emma, that's exactly what my parents were told." Word for word. We stared at each other across the table, the implications sinking in. It wasn't just that we'd been separated. We'd been deliberately presented as only children to our adoptive families. Either the adoption agency had made a massive error, or someone had made a conscious decision to split us up and hide the fact that we were twins. "Why would they do that?" Emma asked, her voice getting smaller. I had theories, none of them comforting. Maybe they thought it would be easier to place us separately. Maybe they were worried about the challenges of adopting twins. Maybe they simply didn't have enough information about our background and made assumptions. Or maybe, more troubling, they knew we were twins and chose not to disclose it because single children were easier to place than sibling groups. The conversation with our parents that evening was one of the hardest I'd ever had. Emma and I called both sets of parents together, using FaceTime so everyone could see each other. Watching my mom and dad meet Emma for the first time, seeing the recognition in their faces as they realized how much she looked like me, was overwhelming. But when we explained what we'd learned about the adoption agency's claims, the mood shifted. My dad, who's usually incredibly calm and measured, got angry in a way I'd rarely seen. "They lied to us," he said, his jaw tight. "We asked specifically about siblings. We would have taken both of you girls without hesitation." Emma's parents had the same reaction. "We drove to that agency office 3 times asking questions," her mom said. "They assured us you were alone, that there were no other children we needed to consider." The betrayal felt enormous. Not just that Emma and I had been separated, but that our parents, who would have moved mountains to keep us together, had been deliberately misled. They'd been denied the chance to make an informed decision about our family. "What do we do about this?" Emma asked. The truth was, there wasn't much we could do. The adoption agency from 1996 no longer existed in the same form. The records were scattered across different organizations. The social workers who handled our cases had likely retired or moved on. Even if we could prove wrongdoing, it wouldn't change the fact that we'd lost 28 years. But what we could do was refuse to lose any more time. Emma and I made a pact that night. Sitting on the hotel balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay, we would not let someone else's decision continue to define our relationship. We'd been robbed of growing up together, but we wouldn't be robbed of our future. "We can't get back our childhood," Emma said, "but we can make sure our kids grow up knowing their aunt. We can make sure our parents get to be grandparents. To both of us. We can build the family we should have had all along." 6 months later, Emma moved to Los Angeles. It wasn't an impulsive decision. She spent weeks researching job opportunities in her field. She's a graphic designer, found an apartment in Silver Lake, just 20 minutes from where Jake and I live, and convinced Marcus to take a chance on Southern California. But underneath all the practical considerations, I knew the truth. She moved because we'd spent 28 years apart, and neither of us was willing to spend any more time living in different cities. The integration of our lives happened more naturally than I expected. Started taking my beginner ballet classes at the studio where I teach, even joined our weekly grocery shopping trips to Trader Joe's. It was the strangest thing, watching someone who was genetically identical to me discover my life and make it partially her own. But it wasn't always smooth. Having a twin as an adult is complicated in ways I never anticipated. We'd both spent nearly 3 decades developing our individual identities, our separate quirks and preferences and worldviews. Sometimes those differences created friction in unexpected ways. Emma is more cautious than I am, more methodical. She plans everything down to the smallest detail, while I tend to leap first and figure out the logistics later. When we decided to take a trip together to visit the region in China where we were born, we had completely different approaches to planning. I wanted to book flights and figure out the rest as we went. She wanted detailed itineraries, backup plans, and contingencies for every possible scenario. "We're not the same person," she said during one particularly frustrating planning session. "Just because we share DNA doesn't mean we share decision-making styles." She was right, and learning to navigate those differences became part of building our adult sibling relationship. We had to learn to be twins without losing ourselves in the process. The trip to China was transformative for both of us. Standing in the orphanage where we'd both lived for the first 6 months of our lives, seeing the cribs where we might have slept side by side, talking to the caretakers who remembered the influx of baby girls. In the late 1990s, it gave us context for our separation that we'd been missing. Many twins were separated then, one of the older women told us through a translator. Sometimes for health reasons, sometimes because international families preferred single children. It was not uncommon. Hearing that our separation wasn't unique helped somehow. We weren't the only twins who'd been split up, not the only siblings who'd grown up apart and found each other decades later. There was a whole community of people like us, adoptees who discovered siblings through DNA testing. Families reunited by modern technology and determination. The most surprising part of integrating Emma into my life was how it affected my relationship with my parents. I'd worried that bringing a new daughter into their world might make them feel like I was replacing them or that their love hadn't been sufficient. Instead, the opposite happened. They embraced Emma with the same fierce protectiveness they'd always shown me. Watching them love her felt like seeing their capacity for love multiply rather than divide. "You girls have given us the most beautiful gift," Mom told me one evening when we were all having dinner together. "Me, Emma, Jake, Marcus, and my parents. We always wondered if there were other children out there connected to you, Sarah. Now we have 2 daughters instead of 1. Emma started calling them Mom and Dad too, gradually at first, then more naturally. Her adoptive parents were wonderful about the whole situation. They flew down from Seattle regularly to have dinner with all of us. Our combined families started celebrating holidays together. What could have been complicated and awkward became joyful and expansive. The biggest change, though, was in me. The persistent feeling of something missing, the nameless homesickness I'd carried my whole life, finally disappeared. It was like a constant background noise had stopped. I hadn't realized how much energy I'd been spending trying to ignore it. Emma and I developed our own traditions. We have dinner together every Tuesday, just the 2 of us, without boyfriends or parents or friends. We call it twin time, and we use it to check in with each other, to share the things we might not say to anyone else. To maintain the connection we're still building. We also started a blog together about our experience, documenting our reunion and the process of becoming adult siblings. We get emails from other adoptees, other separated siblings, other people who've found family through DNA testing. Some of their stories are sadder than ours, some are more complicated. But all of them share that same theme of finding pieces of themselves they didn't know were missing. Last month, Jake proposed to me. He did it at the dance studio where we first met, after my evening class, with Emma hiding in the corner filming the whole thing. When I said yes, Emma was the first person to hug me. And having her there made the moment feel complete in a way I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. "I can't wait to be your maid of honor," she whispered in my ear. "We're planning a double wedding now. Emma and Marcus got engaged 2 weeks after Jake and I did. It feels right, celebrating this next chapter of our lives together after missing so many milestones. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry about the years we lost, if I resent the adoption agency or the circumstances that kept us apart. The truth is, I can't afford to be angry. Anger won't give us back our childhood, and it won't change the decisions other people made on our behalf when we were babies. What I can do is cherish what we have now. Every Tuesday dinner, every shared laugh, every moment when Emma finishes my sentence or we reach for the same thing at the same time. These are gifts I never expected to receive. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't just see myself anymore. I see the person who shares my face, my gestures, my genetic blueprint. I see the sister I was meant to know, the friend I was meant to have, the family I was meant to.